Hi, it's Steph, and tonight is a beautiful evening, and I thought that I would take you around and we would do the August garden tour. We'll take a look at what's blooming and looking beautiful as we head into the end of August. We'll start here by my shed in this bed where I have this beautiful hardy hibiscus planted. This is a Perfect Storm hardy hibiscus by Proven Winners, and it has been planted here for about 3 years. The specs on this particular hibiscus say that they get to be 48 to 52 inches in height and width, and you can see that this one is pretty much full grown at this time. So I don't know how much larger it's going to get, but I'm absolutely loving how beautiful it looks. This hibiscus has dark foliage and these really large, beautiful dinner-sized plate blooms. You can see that they are about a light pink with a little bit of white, and they have a dark red center. They're really tropical looking, and I really enjoy seeing this here in the back by my shed. I wanted to show you the back of this hardy hibiscus because it is loaded down with blooms on all sides. So if you had a bed that you can see from different angles and different sides, this would be a great centerpiece plant because it is so loaded with blooms that you can enjoy from every side. Moving on to these really pretty pollinator magnets here, and these are Verbena bonariensis. Now these self-seed like crazy, so if that's something that you're worried about, you could probably stay away from them in your garden. But if not, I had these planted last year in these planters by my shed, and they self-seeded in this bed here, and I've left them because I actually have really been enjoying the way they look. They're really whimsical, and they are kind of delicate, but yet have this really vibrant little lollipop flower on top. And it's really pretty, and pollinators absolutely love it. And my quick fire hydrangea. This hydrangea is a showstopper. It's got these really gorgeous and large open panicle type blooms. And last month when I did my July garden tour, it was a creamy shade of white. And you can see that now as we head into the end of August, it's taken on this really gorgeous deep pink color. And it will continue to deepen as we get into the fall. This is a great hydrangea. If you are looking for a nice large shrub type hydrangea that has a really sturdy stem, this is one to consider, the quickfire. Now in this bed, I have one more thing that I want to show you, and it is my anemones. Those anemones that I showed last month were just starting to bud up. They are called the rubatissima. And today I have a few that are starting to bloom. Now, anemones have a reputation where they can spread a little bit and become a bit of a garden thug. But I have to say that in my garden, they have not spread aggressively at all. So I really do think it depends on the garden. But if they did spread a little bit, I would be happy to have them because they're really beautiful and a welcome sight for the end of summer. They bloom end of summer through beginning of fall, and they come in many different varieties. In fact, I just added a couple of different ones this year. Here's a little update on my summer containers this year. And a couple months ago, I had showed you my mandevilla that I potted up in these containers and in my window boxes. And I used pink in the front garden and white back here. Well, they are doing wonderful. If you've grown petunias for a long time and you love them, that's great. I used to grow petunias too. But I stopped growing petunias when I realized how easy mandevilla was. Petunias sometimes, they require fertilizing to get really big. They need a lot of water, and you also have to deadhead most of the older varieties. And they just became a little bit of work. And halfway through the summer, you'd have to give them a big haircut because they would get really scraggly in order to rejuvenate them. Well, you don't have to do any of that with mandevilla. They are pretty drought tolerant because they're a tropical. So I have to water them maybe every other day throughout the summer. And this summer, we've been fortunate enough to get pretty regular rain, so I've maybe watered these a half a dozen times since I've planted them out, and they're putting on some great size, and they kind of clean themselves out because once they're done, the blooms just kind of fall to the floor. So when we cut the lawn, they get sucked up in the lawnmower, and I very seldom have to do any kind of cleanup around them. So I'm a big fan of mandevilla, and I thought that I would share this with you in case you're interested in trying these in your containers next year. And my little lime hydrangeas, I absolutely love these. They are about 3 years old in this hedge here, and they have grown so well in this spot. This is a full sun location, and in general, the paniculata type hydrangeas can tolerate more sun than say the macrophylla types. And I have to say that these little limes have handled the sun in this location wonderfully. So if you're looking for a hydrangea that can tolerate a bit more sun and heat, this would be a good option. And now they are starting to transition into their pink color. In areas where you get cooler nights, such as us here in zone 6, they will start transitioning to this pink color as the weather gets cooler. I know that in some areas in the south or warmer climates, they don't always transition to the pink. So we are very fortunate here. They start off a bit of a lime green when they open, and then they become creamy white until finally turning beautiful shades of pink and mauve as we get into the fall. They are a very beautiful hydrangea and really eye-catching, especially in a large drift. And back here on my shed patio, my Boston ferns are doing really well. They took a little while to get going. I had overwintered them, so they were a little slow to pick up, but I did fertilize them about 3 times with some fish emulsion fertilizer, and they've been loving all the rain that we're getting this year, so they've really filled out. And if you're new to my channel, this is the most recent project that my husband and I worked on. We added this garden over the course of the last year, and we call it our Japanese maple garden. And that is because we have a collection of some Japanese maples planted here, as well as some other plants and conifers. This is a newer garden, so we are taking our time with plants and selecting things that will really work with a theme that we're going with in here. And so far, we're really happy with the way it's turning out. And there's a few things that I'll go ahead and show you. But I do plan on doing a full tour in the Japanese maple garden this fall, once all of our maples have their beautiful fall color. In this corner bed here, about maybe a month ago or so, maybe just over a month ago, I had transplanted some pulmonaria or lungwort in this area, and it is doing really well. I had to clean up some of the foliage that had died back because, of course, I transplanted it in the heat of the summer, which isn't ideal, but it can be done. If you recall, I had an umbrella over here to shade the transplants. I kept up with watering, and they did mostly well. But the minute I tried to remove the umbrella, I had a lot of foliage that kind of crisped up. So I did remove those leaves, and it's starting to push out some new growth. So overall, the transplants are doing well. I recently picked up a new plant for this area. It's a euphorbia called Ascot Rainbow. Now, it is a really pretty variegated green and yellow type euphorbia, and the new growth almost has a little bit of pink to it. It's really pretty, but it is only marginally hardy in my zone. It is hardy to a zone 7, and I garden in a zone 6. So the nursery gave me some advice to just make sure that it's well mulched and maybe just pile some leaves around it as we head into winter, and it should come through just fine. So we will see. I do like to test the limits on some things in the garden, so I bought one only as an experiment. I also recently divided my caramel heuchera and my black pearl heuchera, and I dotted it around this hinoki here. And they're doing really well. I usually don't have a lot of luck with heuchera, but this caramel variety seems to be a little bit hardier for me than others. I do have this hinoki that is struggling a little bit. This is called Melody Hinoki Cypress, and you can see that it's had quite a bit of dieback, and I thought that it would flush out with some spring needles, but it didn't, or some spring foliage. I did fertilize it. It's just not happy in this spot, and that happens sometimes. It could be that the plant is sick. For whatever reason, it just looks like it's on the out. So I'm going to leave it here as a placeholder at least through the fall and maybe even next spring, and then I will find something to replace it. Here's another really cool shrub that will start having some really pretty fall color pretty soon, and it is a dwarf oak leaf hydrangea. The variety that I have here is a yellow-leaved dwarf variety called Little Honey, and it's getting a little more sun than it would like, and so it's burning up a little bit, but over time, it should acclimate to this spot, and as my Japanese maples grow, they'll provide a bit more shade cover. The Little Honey oak leaf hydrangea only gets to be about 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, so nice and compact, and it gets a really pretty red fall color. My Japanese painted ferns are also doing pretty well. I dotted them along the edge of this walkway here, and earlier this season, they were getting a little too much sun where I had them, planted. So I moved them here where they're getting a little bit of shade from this Japanese maple that I have planted right above them. It's called Ariadne, and it has a beautiful burnt orange color in the spring, and then it goes a bit green with some reticulation on the foliage, and pretty soon it will have some fall color. But it's providing just enough shade to provide a canopy for these ferns to keep them happy. If you recall, a few videos back, I had done a plant swap with Janie over at Dig Plant Water Repeat. I sent her a Japanese maple and she sent me this Chinese Fringe flower, and it is doing really well. I'm really excited to see how this goes. This plant is rated like a zone 7, just like the Ascot Rainbow Euphorbia that I showed you. So this is another one that is going to be interesting to see if it makes it through the winter. I'm hopeful that it will, because it's a really cool plant. It's low growing, it has this dark foliage and these really cute little finger looking hot pink blooms. So I would love for this to be able to live in my garden, and we will see with pushing the limits to see if it will overwinter for me here in my zone 6. This new garden has come a long way in just 2 seasons, and I have a lot of footage of us creating this area. It used to be where my children's playset was. So over the winter months, we will make a compilation video showing the whole process from beginning through end, and I think that will be really fun. But I'm very much looking forward to the fall color on these Japanese maples this year. And let me show you a couple more things. If you like lamb's ear, but you don't want it to become invasive, some of the varieties that bloom can drop seed, and before you know it, you have tons of lamb's ear everywhere. Let me share with you this variety in case you're not familiar with it. It is called the Helen von Steen lamb's ear, and it is gorgeous. It is a wonderful foliage perennial. It has this amazing blue-gray color, and it has a fuzzy texture, which means that deer mostly stay away from it. I don't have any deer eating on these, no bunnies, nothing. I have a hole in that leaf. It might be from a snail or slug, but you can see that in general, they look fabulous. Really great for a ground cover plant. And I started with 3 small plants, and I've now divided it a bunch of times. I've given some away, and I have these large clumps just from 3 small perennials. So it's amazing how much this plant provides. It just keeps growing and growing. So if you have a border or a large area that you want to cover, this would be a great option for some texture and some blue-gray color. This variety of lamb's ear, the Helen von Steen, does not bloom. So it doesn't drop seed, but it does fill out and get pretty big. And the lady's mantle that I started from seed this year, I recently transplanted. I put some of them here in front of my autumn moon Japanese maple. And I put a couple more to join the grouping that I already had on my other side so that they mirror both sides of the entry to the walkway. I put 2 more right here. So now I have a drift of 4 on the left and a grouping of 3 on the right. Ever since I put my Dollar Tree mesh wastebaskets, also known as cloches, on top of my Carex, the bunnies have mostly left it alone. Some of the ones that kind of reached out through the basket are getting nibbled, but not that bad. So it's helping the Carex recover and grow back. Our vegetable garden is also being very productive. We have a ton of cherry tomatoes that my little guy went and picked for us. So that's always fun. Thanks, buddy. Here in my patio bed, I have a few things that are also blooming. Starting with this delphinium. This is actually the 2nd time this season that this beautiful delphinium is blooming. I'm just excited that they're blooming for a 2nd time. That's always a bonus. And now that my coneflowers are starting to fade, I have some zinnias that are filling in those gaps. So zinnias, cosmos, any kind of annual that you can easily start from seed is wonderful for that late summer blooms that will carry you through a hard frost in the fall. They really fill in those gaps in the garden when your perennials kind of start to peter out. The Golden Jubilee hyssop that I also started from seed using the winter sowing method is also doing really well. It took a little while to get going because it was pretty cold at the beginning of the summer, and these like a lot of heat and they like it dry, and we've been having a lot of rain. So I think both the rain and the cool temperatures gave them a little bit of a late start, but now they are doing wonderfully and the bees love it. It also has a really nice minty fragrance on the foliage, and I love this golden yellow color. And look how beautiful this green Twista echinacea is looking. It is actually a pink and green coneflower, but it's taken on such a beautiful color as it's aged. I think this will transition really nicely into fall, so I plan on leaving these up because I'm really loving the texture and structure that they provide. The cones are really large and beautiful, and the goldfinches love these seeds. I'll let them self-seed a little bit, and I think it'll be great. And they coordinate so well with this Eupatorium rugosa chocolate right behind it that is starting to now bud up and should be blooming in the next few weeks. I think it's safe to say that the pollinators absolutely love the Joe Pye weed in my garden. So this was a wonderful addition this year, and I think the bees are really happy about it. And another recent addition was this chalone or turtlehead plant. It is now starting to bloom, and this plant is supposed to bloom for about 3 weeks in late summer through early fall. And it looks like the bees also love it. I've even caught a hummingbird on it. I tucked it right under this Japanese maple canopy so that I can offer it a little bit of shade, because chalone is a plant that likes part shade to shade and moist soil. So the moist soil won't be a problem in this bed because it stays pretty moist. But I was worried a little bit about the sun, but I think that this spot will work out just fine. Right after my July garden tour, my Nephophia or red hot poker started to bloom. So it had its first big flush a couple of weeks back, and just this week I saw 2 more blooms on the plant. So I did get some footage of it to share with you here in my August garden tour. Nephophia is a great plant because even when it's not in bloom, you have this clump that looks like an ornamental grass. The varieties of zinnias that I'm growing this year are the Zinniarita, which is a cactus style, ruffly kind of salmon colored one. The Purple Prince is a really large pink one and tall, just really stately looking. And of course the beautiful Queen Lime Orange. The Queen Lime Orange is my favorite of the Queen Lime series. It just has such a beautiful variation of color. It is stunning. And each one is different than the last. So a really interesting zinnia. Even in the same plant, you are going to get doubles and singles. It's gorgeous. And this white variety is called Polar Bear White. I purchased the seeds from Baker Creek, and it's also a really pretty variety of white zinnia. In this corner of my patio bed, I also have a few more zinnias growing, and I have another Queen Lime Orange, a variety called Envy, which is a green type of zinnia, and a double Enchantress, which is this gorgeous pink one here. The Firelight Tidbits that I planted a few weeks back are also doing really well. I did trim some of the blooms off just to give the plant the opportunity to work on some root development. This one had some small blooms, so I left them. This Acorus Ogon Sweet Flag I recently divided this season also. And now that the weather is getting a bit cooler and we've had lots of rain, this plant loves water. It is growing really nicely. I love the way it edges this bed. Pretty soon I will be doing a little bit of work in this bed. We have to improve the drainage. I'm planning on adding a drift of some boxwood that I can shape into little balls to give this bed a little more wintergreen or evergreen interest. This allium here is it has been blooming. It's had off for like a couple of weeks now, maybe about 3 weeks, and it's finally starting to fade a little bit, but the pollinators don't care. The bees love this plant, the butterflies. There is always activity all over these plants. This grouping of allium that I have planted here is the Millennium Allium, and this variety blooms a little bit earlier. Now this type of allium, this perennial allium, is a mid-summer to late summer bloomer, and the Millennium for me blooms first, and I have another variety called Lavender Bubbles, and that one has just started to bloom. So it's really great to have a couple of different varieties, especially if it's a plant that you like, so that you can extend your bloom show. And right on the side of my Millennium Allium, I have a beautiful Weigela. This is the My Monet Purple Effects Weigela by Proven Winners. And it blooms in late spring with a purple pink little bell or trumpet shaped flower. But besides the blooms, this is a gorgeous foliage shrub because it has this beautiful variegation. So when it blooms, the foliage starts off really small, but once it's done blooming, the foliage gets larger and it has this really pretty coloring. It's got a green center with a creamy outer margin, and it's even trimmed by a little bit of pink. And even as the weather starts cooling off and we transition into fall, the foliage gets even more pink and red. So this is a great shrub to add to your mixed shrub borders. If you have limited space, it is a dwarf variety. So the specs on this one says that it gets to be 18 to 24 inches tall and wide. I'm pretty sure mine is there at this point because it's really happy and it's been growing really well. It's been planted here for about 2 years, and I really love this Weigela. And the anemones that I recently planted in this bed are also opening up. They were all budded up when I planted them, and now the blooms are opening. This anemone is called Whirlwind, and it is a double ruffly white variety. This bed here by my driveway is really starting to mature and look really lovely at this point. I have a hedge of 5 Bobo hydrangeas, and this year they've looked the best that they've ever looked. The first couple of years they were pretty small, and then last year they struggled a little bit with the drought that we had and the heat. They started to get a bit crispy, and in fact I do still have 2 down the end here that did get a little bit more brown. But these larger ones here are handling the sun much better this year with the regular rain that we've been getting. They are a lovely hydrangea, they're pretty compact, and they really do make such an impact when I come down the driveway, and I really love the way that they look. In front of them, I have a grouping of some other plantings, starting with these really beautiful alliums called Lavender Bubbles. This Lavender Bubbles actually has more of a bluish tint to the foliage. And even when they're not in bloom, they're really pretty because they just look like a clump of strappy grass. This year, I decided to plant a border of annuals in the front of this bed to kind of fill things out. And I chose the Zahara Raspberry Ripple Zinnia. It is a dwarf or short stature zinnia. These would be wonderful to use in window boxes, in containers, or how I'm using them here in the front of a border. They have almost like a striping effect, and they're really low maintenance. I have not had to deadhead these or do anything to them, and they just keep blooming and blooming. And I am going to grow these again. They're very similar to, say, the Profusion series of zinnias, where they're also really short, compact, and bushy. And they just make a really pretty impact in the front of a border. I recently added some more perennials for late summer, early fall color. 2 anemones in this bed here. The variety is called Honorine Jobert, and it is a white anemone, which is really pretty. And I have a bunch more buds that are getting ready to open up. And a Matrona sedum right here in the front of my weeping blue spruce. I really like the red foliage and stems of the sedum, and it'll start opening up and blooming, and it's a great late summer, early fall blooming perennial. And just a few weeks ago, I had a drift of Casablanca lilies, which are a white oriental lily, all along the back of this bed. The fragrance was intoxicating and they were gorgeous. The blooms are large and white and looked really stunning with the color of this blue weeping spruce. I also have some Rudbeckia that kind of just popped up in this bed. Rudbeckia will seed freely, so if you leave some of the bloom heads up and they start to dry, they will drop seed over the winter months and then they will grow new plants. So that is what happened with this Rudbeckia. I actually had it self-seed here, and I am really liking it this year. In the past, I haven't liked yellow plants, but I think my taste in the garden is changing because at this point late in the gardening season, I'm really appreciating that golden color as we head into the fall. And I have some cosmos that I started from seed. And starting things from seed like cosmos, zinnias is a great way to fill in gaps in the garden and to provide seasonal color. And you can change them every year to whatever color you choose that year. And so it keeps the garden interesting and really pretty. Here in my main walkway bed, I want to show you my gomphrena that I'm growing this year. If you recall from last year, I had the most beautiful drift of the atomic purple gomphrena. I had bought the seeds from Baker Creek and they grew beautifully. And I had this beautiful drift all up and down the walkway of these bright purple little ball-shaped flowers. They were stunning. So I thought that I would try gomphrena again this year, but this time I selected a white variety. I thought that the white would look really flattering with the pink knockout roses. But it turns out that I don't really like the white. The variety I picked was Snow White. And while the seeds germinated wonderfully, they grew beautifully, they're healthy, they're disease-free, the deer and rabbits don't fuss with it, so it's a really low care, low maintenance, and drought-tolerant plant. I have not watered these at all since I planted the seedlings. They're just getting watered by Mother Nature, and they're doing wonderful. The problem is that they just kind of fade into the background. So the white is just not as eye-catching as the atomic purple was. So for that reason, I will not grow the white again. But here's what it looks like as we head into the end of August. They still have some growing to do, and my guess is that they will get just as large as my last variety did. So by October, they should be overhanging this walkway. And my knockout roses, they have their first big flush in June, as most roses do. But the knockouts just keep going and going throughout the summer. They might have a little bit of a lull in July, and then they come back and they will bloom until you get a hard frost. And this beautiful shrub here in front of my boulevard cypress is called a candy corn spirea. It is a dwarf spirea, but it has the most beautiful color variation. It will start with a red coloring in very early spring, then it will turn orange and then a yellow chartreuse color, and then all of these beautiful colors. You can see this is all the new growth. So this is why it's called candy corn. It has almost like a red and an orangey and yellow color. It's stunning. So if you have a spot that you want a really eye-catching spirea for full sun, the candy corn spirea is a great choice. And it has clusters of pink blooms in late spring, early summer that the pollinators also love. It's actually the same pink as my knockout roses. And in the corner here, I have a hibiscus, another hardy hibiscus. And this one is a Luna hibiscus, and it is white. I actually started with one, and I've been able to divide it, and now I have one on this side and on the other side of the walkway. This hibiscus has been blooming for about a month now, so the blooms are starting to get fewer as we go on, but the blooms are also really large and a gorgeous shade of white with a tiny hint of blush around the edges and also a red center. And this year I planted a couple of zinnias here. Not zinnias, dahlias. I had a couple of dahlia tubers that a friend had given me. They were a shorter dahlia that would be great for a border. So I tucked these two white ones here, and they're just starting to bloom. In this front border here, I recently made some changes. I had pulled out all of my daylilies, and I planted some late summer, early fall blooming perennials. I have here some Blue Fortune, Agastache. I also transplanted some Rudbeckia from another area in my garden. I have since cut down the blooms so that this transplant can focus on root development and not on supporting the blooms. They started to wilt, so I thought, you know what, it's probably just going to be best to cut them off. And that's exactly what I did. As we walk over, I also added a couple more things. I had some Maynite salvia that I transplanted here in this area. So it's not looking great at the moment, but it will. Next spring it'll look great. And I cut down all of the foliage on my iris so it can grow back nice and fresh. And I also transplanted some white swan echinacea. So I have a grouping of echinacea here on the side of my penstemon that bloomed earlier in the season. And I have another grouping on the other side of the penstemon. The candy corn spirea in the front of this bed is also looking really beautiful and bright. And this little evergreen here is stunning. If you're looking for a small, compact evergreen, this is a Hinoki cypress called Nana Lutea. It is wonderful. It was actually hidden by all of my daylily foliage, so as soon as I was able to clean out this bed, it immediately became more visible. It has a really beautiful, vibrant golden color. And that's what looks really interesting in a garden, is having evergreens in shades of blue and green and yellow. It really gives you something pretty to look at in the winter months when our flowers are not blooming. I still have some phlox that is blooming and a knockout rose that was struggling a little bit, but it's now starting to push out some new foliage and some new blooms. So I think it's going to be just fine. Some fresh coneflowers that just started blooming this week. This is Echinacea purpurea, and it's self-seeded in this spot here in front of my Colorado blue spruce and on the side of my Fireglow Japanese maple. And I think it looks really pretty. I often get asked about this evergreen, and it's gorgeous. This is actually a blue atlas cedar in serpentine shape. So it's trained like an S. And it was one of the first evergreens I purchased from my garden. It's got a really nice growth habit. It's pretty compact because it is trained in that serpentine shape. And it contrasts beautifully with this blue star juniper. So if you're looking for a compact, low-growing evergreen that's low fuss, this is a good one. Blue star juniper. This is about 10 years old, and it's maybe 3 by 4. And only about maybe 18 inches in height. It's great, really low maintenance and really gorgeous blue color. The fashionably early phlox has just finished putting out its second bloom cycle for the season. It bloomed early in late spring, so earlier in the season, and it just bloomed again. Now this phlox did get pretty bad powdery mildew, so I think that removing the daylilies will give it a bit more airflow, and hopefully next year it won't suffer from the same powdery mildew, but time will tell. There is the other Blue Fortune agastache, and as we move down the bed, I have a grouping of Rudbeckia, which I'm really enjoying this year. For a while, I didn't like this golden yellow color in my garden, and all of a sudden, I'm loving it. And my Luna White hibiscus, which is just finished blooming, but looked really beautiful just a few days ago. And here on my front porch is where I have my other containers of mandevilla. In the back, I went with the white next to my shed because it complemented the shed nicely. But in the front, I went with pink. Because our home is set back from the street, I thought that the pink would be more vibrant and eye-catching. And they filled out the containers lovely. I have hardly had to water these again this summer because of the rain. I've maybe watered them a half a dozen times or so, and they're doing really well. And another annual that I used down here was the lantana. So I recently went through and did clean up the lantana, and now it's starting to flush out again. And both of these plants are great to have together as a complementary plant in containers because they're both pretty drought tolerant, both the lantana and the mandevilla. So I find that this combination has been working really well, and it's one that I plan on repeating again. The creeping Jenny in the front also provides a really nice pop of yellow in contrast with the pink, and I just think it looks really nice with the brown containers. So I'm really enjoying the look of that as well, draping in front of the container. So that brings us to the end of the August garden tour. I can't believe that the summer is almost finishing up and we'll be heading into fall. So we'll probably do a couple of more garden tours before the season wraps up. So thank you so much for spending your time with me this evening. I hope that you've enjoyed checking out the garden, and I will catch you in the next one. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up button, and please consider subscribing so you don't miss any of my future videos. And we'll see you soon.